Hello and welcome to grammar class. Today's topic is the absolute phrase or the nominative absolute. When the rain stopped, the children came out to play. You see, there are two clauses in this sentence. When the rain stopped and the children came out to play. Now I can combine these two clauses into a simple sentence by turning the first clause into an absolute phrase. The rain having stopped, the children came out to play. In this sentence, the expression the rain having stopped is called the absolute phrase. So now the question arises, what is an absolute phrase in English grammar? Well, an absolute phrase is a group of words in which there is a noun or a pronoun and its modifiers. In other words, an absolute phrase consists of a noun or a pronoun followed by a participle or a participle phrase as its modifier. And such a phrase is called an absolute phrase because it modifies the whole clause or sentence and not a certain part of it. Now look at the structure or construction of the absolute phrase on your screen. A noun or pronoun plus a present participle or perfect participle or past participle or a participle phrase. In short, an absolute phrase has a noun or pronoun followed by a participle or a participle phrase. In English grammar, an absolute participle is also called a nominative absolute or an absolute construction. So now we know that an absolute phrase is made up of a noun or a pronoun as well as a participle or a participle phrase. And we also know that an absolute phrase modifies or adds some information to the entire clause and not just the subject or the predicate. So it is called an absolute phrase. Now see some examples of absolute phrases on your screen. In the sentence, it being a holiday, we went to see a movie. It being a holiday is an absolute phrase. The absolute phrase here consists of the pronoun it and the participle phrase being a holiday. The phrase here modifies the entire clause we went to see a movie by stating the cause of our going to see a movie. In the next example, the sun having set is the absolute phrase consisting of the noun sun and the perfect participle having set. Here the absolute phrase tells us why and when the farmers returned home. In the last example, the man-eater having been killed is the absolute phrase consisting of the noun man-eater and the perfect participle in passive voice having been killed. In this sentence, the absolute phrase or the nominative absolute tells us the reason why we all felt relieved. Now let me tell you a couple of important things about the absolute phrase. You see, an absolute phrase may come at the beginning or in the middle or at the end of a sentence. And do remember that an absolute phrase is always set apart from the rest of the sentence by commas or dashes. For example, in the sentence, the bell having rung, the students entered their class, the absolute phrase, the bell having rung, comes at the beginning of the sentence. But in the second example, I hope to get a promotion next year, God willing. The absolute phrase God willing comes at the very end of the sentence. Then in the last sentence, the businessman, his son having been kidnapped, lodged an FIR with the police. The absolute phrase his son having been kidnapped occurs in the middle of the sentence after the subject. And you must also notice how in all these examples, the absolute phrases are set off with commas from the rest of the sentences. Well, we now know that an absolute phrase modifies a whole clause in the sentence. But how? Well, the absolute phrase or the nominative absolute indicates a cause and effect relation with the clause it modifies. In other words, the absolute phrase shows the reason or cause and the clause or the rest of the sentence shows the effect or reaction. Now understand this from an example. The war having broken out, people started fleeing the country. The absolute phrase, the war having broken out, indicates the reason, the war, and the clause it modifies, people started leaving the country, indicates the effect of the war, that people were leaving the country. In the second example, it being very hot, we could not go out of home, the absolute phrase it being very hot indicates the reason or cause, while the rest of the sentence expresses the effect or result. Moreover, the absolute phrase may also provide some additional information in the sentence. For example, in the sentence, he stood speechless, his face looking pale. The absolute phrase, his face looking pale, provides some additional information about his condition, though it is not necessary for the sentence. Then in the sentence, the terrorist lay dead, his face twisted and eyes popping out. There are two absolute phrases, his face twisted and his eyes popping out, both providing additional but not necessary pieces of information about his condition. So we understand that an absolute phrase may indicate the cause of the main action in the sentence or provide some additional information about it. Now we know that an absolute phrase has a noun or pronoun followed by a participle or participle phrase. But sometimes the participle in the absolute phrase is hidden or understood. For example, in the sentence, the match over, we returned home, in the absolute phrase, the match over, the present participle being is hidden. Similarly, in the next example, the curfew imposed in the city is the absolute phrase, in which the perfect participle having been imposed is understood. Well, then absolute phrases are also used to combine two sentences with different subjects. For example, it was a holiday and we went out for a picnic are two related sentences with different subjects. So we can combine them by changing the first sentence into an absolute phrase. It being a holiday, we went out for a picnic. So that's the end of today's class. I hope you liked the video. Please be sure to like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel for more grammar videos. Thank you so much.